People often believe that narcissists can get away with everything. They deceive, manipulate, destroy, and somehow they walk away as if nothing ever happened. But the truth is, the universe never forgets. Nature, psychology, and even society itself have their own kind of memory. No one can escape themselves forever. When 60 comes, the mask they've worn their whole life begins to crack. The charm fades, the audience leaves, and all that remains is the self they've been running from for decades. This isn't karma in the religious sense. There's no thunder striking down, no divine fire of punishment. This is psychological karma, the inevitable price of trading truth for illusion. Because when you live on admiration instead of authenticity, when your worth depends on how others see you, death doesn't arrive as an ending. It begins with the absence of an audience. At 60, the narcissist has no one left to control, no one left to impress. They sit in the silence of the same room that once was their stage, and in that silence, what echoes loudest is the sound of their own lies. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When the mask falls, karma doesn't come from the outside. It rises from the very unconscious they have nurtured in the dark. And today we will look straight into that truth. The final karma of the narcissist after 60, when illusion collapses and the light of truth shines on the darkness they once hid. Chapter 1. The Exploration of Charm. Charm is the narcissist's first weapon, and the first to betray them. For most of their life, they believe that as long as they're charming enough, smart enough, and know how to make people feel loved, every door will open. They don't seek truth, they seek admiration. They don't need honesty, only belief. For them, charm is a mask carefully trained over years to control emotions and, more importantly, to hide the emptiness within. But no performance lasts forever. Over time, their compliments sound hollow, their smiles lack warmth, and their concern smells of calculation. People begin to sense the void behind the confidence, a place where emotion doesn't touch truth, but repeats a script. At first, others are enchanted. Then they doubt. Finally, they grow exhausted. A narcissist's charm works like a drug. It gives you a rush at first, then leaves a bitter aftertaste. You think you're being seen, but later you realize they never saw you. They only saw a reflection of themselves in your eyes. When age creeps in, when energy fades, when admiration runs dry, they fall into the silence they've spent a lifetime avoiding. It is the silence of a room once full that now stands empty. No one laughs at the old stories, no one applauds their boasts. They speak louder, but the world no longer listens. Without an audience, they suddenly don't know who they are. That feeling, being invisible, forgotten, is the narcissist's deepest fear, because they have never existed outside the gaze of others. Jung once said, "The persona is what we believe ourselves to be, but it is not who we are." The narcissist has lived entirely inside that persona, the mask of charm, confidence, and success. But as the world matures, their tricks lose power. Others begin to notice the artificial sweetness in their words. Once you taste it, you can't unsee it. And when the illusion is exposed, charm turns into repulsion. People leave, not out of hate, but because the body and soul instinctively reject falseness. From that moment, the spotlight fades. They enter a room and no one looks up. They tell a story and no one responds. They smile and silence answers back. That quiet dismissal from the world is the real karma. No lightning bolts, no flames, just the slow disintegration of power built on illusion. When the final light goes out, they realize that charm without character was only borrowed currency. It existed through the light of others, and when no one reflects it back, it vanishes. That is the beginning of true karmic consequence, when the world stops looking and they are forced to see themselves. Chapter 2. The collapse of the false self. A narcissist never truly knows who they are outside the roles they play. They identify entirely with how others perceive them. I'm successful, I'm loved, I'm special. But when those definitions stop being confirmed, the entire psychological structure begins to fracture, not in a dramatic explosion, but in a quiet decay, like a house eaten from the inside by termites. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious," and that is precisely what the narcissist refuses to do, to face their own darkness. They hide it behind achievements, praise, power, and image, until the mask can no longer hold. When charm fades, when people stop believing, the darkness surfaces, and for the first time in their life, they must look directly at it. But the darkness is not just terrifying, it is real. It holds the parts of themselves they've denied, the fear of abandonment, the sense of worthlessness, the memories buried alive. When those fragments rise, they panic. They don't know how to feel or process real emotion. They've spent a lifetime performing. Now there's no script left. They talk louder, laugh harder, insist they're fine. But inside, an unseen collapse begins. The fall of the false self doesn't come from outside, it happens in their own mind. When someone lives too long inside a performance, they forget the person who once existed before the act, and when the act is stripped away, they find no one left behind it. There is no true self, only emptiness. That is the deepest tragedy of narcissism. They don't just lose others, they lose themselves. You can see this in many older people who were once powerful or charming. They can't stand silence. They fear solitude. They keep talking about the good old days, as if clinging to the last remnants of an identity that has already dissolved. Every boast is a desperate attempt to convince themselves that they still exist. But in truth, they're only talking to their own shadow. When the false self collapses, their mind descends into chaos. Memories distort, stories twist, and every mistake becomes someone else's fault. They cannot bear guilt, so they distort reality to avoid it. They say the world betrayed them, that people are cruel, that they are the true victim. And in trying to rebuild their wall of lies, they drift even farther from truth. This is the hell Jung described, where a person is devoured by the very darkness they refuse to acknowledge. No one punishes them, truth punishes them. No enemy destroys them, their own ego does. At 60, everything they once believed to be strength, confidence, control, allure, dissolves. What remains is a soul that never learned to love, an ego that never learned to live honestly, and an aging body carrying the weight of decades of deceit. That's when they realize they no longer control the role controls them. Chapter 3. The Mirror of Loneliness. After the charm fades and the false self collapses, the narcissist enters a stage they were never prepared for, facing raw reality. Their finances, their health, and their true worth. Throughout life, they've believed they were special, that they would always find a way, that money, opportunities, and people would always be there to serve them. That belief never came from real ability, but from an illusion of power, a kind of psychological drug that made them think they were untouchable, entitled, and always one step above everyone else. In youth, they used charm, status, or clever words to get what they wanted. They spent money as if it existed only to prove their superiority, buying to impress, not to build. They invested in appearances, clothes, cars, parties, image, but never in discipline, skill, or substance. In their mind, I deserve always mattered more than I've earned. But time is a teacher that shows no mercy. When 60 comes, the illusions crumble piece by piece. Health declines, work slows down, admirers vanish, the flow of money, once fueled by charm or power, dries up. They finally face what they once mocked. The consequences of irresponsibility: no financial plan, no savings, no foundation, only memories of parties, trips, and relationships long gone. They don't understand why the world turned its back. But the truth is, the world didn't turn away, it simply stopped lending. Those who once funded, helped, or admired them are now tired. When you spend a lifetime taking without giving, the supply always runs out. As bills pile up, they face a crisis that can't be solved with charm or talk. No one believes them anymore. Promises like, "I'll pay you later," or "a big deal is coming soon," only push people further away. They were once used to being favored. Now, they can't stand the humiliation of asking for help. Yet they also can't humble themselves to work or start over. Their ego is too inflated to allow it. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And when their finances collapse, they still refuse to take responsibility. They blame an unfair system, betrayal, or bad luck. But deep down, they know. They spent a lifetime feeding illusion instead of building substance. They lived like kings in castles of sand. And now the tide of time is rising. The financial collapse of a narcissist isn't just about losing money, it's about losing power. Because to them, money isn't for living, it's for controlling. When it's gone, they're not just poor, they're powerless. They can no longer manipulate, reward, or threaten. They can't buy admiration or obedience. They must face their greatest fear, being worthless in the eyes of others. In isolation and scarcity, many spiral into panic. They reach out to old acquaintances, beg for help, make promises, or tell dramatic stories. Some try to rebuild their image, posting fake pictures of success, boasting about the past, living online to feel powerful again. But the more they try to prove, the more transparent their despair becomes. Those who once believed now watch in silence as they repeat the same cycle of self-deception. Some fall all the way to the bottom: bankruptcy, homelessness, ruined reputation, yet still refuse to admit fault. They blame society, their children, or a cruel fate. But it's not fate, it's the bill for their illusions. You cannot spend a lifetime living on admiration without the currency of integrity. One day, the universe sends the invoice, and when that debt comes due, no one can pay it for you. Karma doesn't arrive as punishment, it arrives as the absence of power, as the quiet shame of realizing how much life was wasted. They once thought they were clever, always believing they'd find a way, but in the end, with nothing left to prove, they are left alone, surrounded by unpaid debts and memories they can't bear to face. The cruel irony is that the only wealth that could have saved them, honesty, humility, and compassion, were the very things they despised. And by the time they understand that truth, most have no time or strength left to learn it. They live in empty houses, surrounded by objects that once symbolized power, now reflecting only loneliness. As the last light of day falls through the window, they sit there, old, quiet, broke, alone, stripped of their stage. And in that moment they finally understand what they never could before. Real power was never about being admired, it was about having the courage to be real. Chapter 4. Ego as the prison. After the charm fades and the money runs out, the narcissist enters the final stage of their illusion. They still believe they are in control, when in truth they are now imprisoned by their own ego. All their life they used the ego as armor, to hide fear, to prove worth, to avoid ever saying, "I was wrong." But when admiration fades, when money disappears, when there is no one left to blame, that armor stops protecting them. It becomes a cage. Outwardly, they still try to look confident. They talk about the past, their glory days, and the ungrateful people who forgot what I've done for them. But deep down, they know the world no longer believes them. Their words now echo through empty rooms, and the only sound they hear is the echo of their own voice. Carl Jung once said, "Inflation of the ego is always followed by collapse." And this is the moment when that prophecy comes true. The narcissist once believed that ego was power, that being hard, cold, and clever guaranteed victory. But what they called strength was only fear in disguise. They feared being forgotten, disrespected, or seen as small. And to escape that fear, they built a gigantic self, brilliant, arrogant, always right. Yet everything artificial eventually breaks. As age advances, physical strength fades, memory weakens, relationships dissolve, and that grand ego loses its audience. There's no one left to admire or fear them. No one left to control. And something they never expected begins to happen. Self-isolation. Not because the world abandoned them, but because they can't stand seeing others happier, more authentic, or simply at peace. They feel jealousy, shame, and pain, but they can't name those emotions. So they withdraw, lock the door, and live inside the castle of illusion, where only the voice of the ego remains. No one deserves you. No one understands you. The whole world owes you. That becomes their prison, an invisible but unbreakable cell. The door isn't locked, but they can't walk out, because stepping outside would mean admitting they were wrong. And for a narcissist, admitting fault is the death of the ego. Chapter 5. The debt comes due. No loan lasts forever, especially emotional ones. Throughout life, the narcissist survives on emotional credit, borrowing trust, admiration, and affection, spending them as if repayment would never come due. They even borrow the light of others to shine upon themselves, but never create light of their own. And then, as years pass, when charm fades, money dries up, and reputation collapses, life's bank begins to send the bill. Well, at first, the debt arrives quietly. Messages go unanswered. The promises of, "I'll help you one more time," disappear. Doors that once opened automatically now close, gently but firmly. No one attacks them. People simply keep their distance, because everyone has learned one simple truth. Everything around a narcissist orbits one center: me. The narcissist doesn't understand why everything stops flowing. They think it's bad luck, betrayal, or an ungrateful world. But life doesn't punish. It merely collects what was taken without return. Every false promise, every exploited kindness, every tear they caused becomes a kind of energetic debt. And after enough time, it all comes back. Not in a mystical way, but in a painfully real one. Loneliness, loss of respect, emptiness, and ruin. What they once glorified, admiration, control, praise, becomes a burden. They realize people no longer come out of love, but out of pity or obligation. No one believes the stories anymore. I'm the victim. I just wanted to be understood. Every word sounds hollow, every action is transparent, and in the cold eyes of others, they finally see the truth they cannot deny. Everything they ever had was borrowed. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." The narcissist resists responsibility, avoids shame, denies guilt, and those very things return to haunt them, layer by layer. When young, they thought they could handle everyone. In old age, they discover they can't handle themselves. They live in the same house that once symbolized success, now turned into a prison. Everything around them, the photos, the chair, the mirror, retells the story of who they pretended to be, and every morning, when they look in that mirror, they no longer see a winner, they see a debtor. Money debts can be paid. Reputation can sometimes be rebuilt, but soul debts, debts of truth, trust, and love, have no grace period. They can only be repaid through awareness, through facing oneself without running away. Most never find that courage. They keep blaming. If I had another chance, if people hadn't abandoned me, if life were fairer. But every if only extends their sentence. Because karma doesn't demand money, it demands truth. And truth, no matter how late, always finds its way home. Life never forgets. It doesn't seek revenge or human justice. It simply follows the law of return. You receive the energy you create. The narcissist spends a lifetime manipulating emotions, spending others' love like currency, and in the end they must live off what they produced. Emptiness. No one comes to destroy them. They dissolve within the house of lies they built with their own hands. By 60 or 70, there's no one left to blame, no one to manipulate, no one to admire them. They sit alone in silence. No music, no applause, only the ticking clock counting down the final years. And in a rare moment of clarity, they realize the most bitter truth. Everything they fought to preserve, attention, power, image, means nothing without a soul behind it. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But the narcissists never lived that privilege. They chose illusion over truth, admiration over love, power over peace. Karma doesn't come to destroy, it comes to awaken. In the end, the real price they pay isn't losing money, status, or people. It's losing themselves. If you've ever been hurt by a narcissist, know this. You don't need to wish for their punishment. Life already delivers it. Slowly, but surely. Isolation, silence, emptiness. These are lessons no words can save them from. They will have to sit in the chamber of their own soul, face the shadow they once denied, and look upon the self they never had the courage to become. But for you, the one who was wounded yet awakened, there is freedom. Freedom from needing revenge. Freedom in knowing that life's justice isn't found in their collapse, but in your rebirth. And that is what Jung meant by the shadow. It doesn't exist for you to hate. It exists so you can see yourself within it. Let the narcissist remain trapped in the world they built, where the lights are out and the performance is over. As for you, the one who survived and chose awareness, step off that stage. Don't look back, because their final karma is to live long enough to face the truth, and your greatest reward is to awaken deeply enough to never become them. That is the most beautiful justice the universe can give.